The crack split the canyon like a whip made of thunder. 4 seconds of silence had passed since the muzzle flash appeared on the eastern ridge, and every man standing behind the spotting scopes had stopped breathing. The sound reached them late, rolling through the rock walls in layers, folding over itself until it felt less like a gunshot and more like the mountain clearing its throat. Then the radio crackled. The range safety officer's voice came through flat, stripped of everything except disbelief. Impact confirmed. Center mass, 3,460 meters. Nobody moved. The woman on the ridge was already standing, the old Winchester cradled against her chest like something borrowed from a museum. She was small, dark hair pulled tight, dust on her sleeves, and she had not been at her assigned firing position for nearly 20 minutes. But that was the end. This is how it started. 11 hours earlier, the sun had not yet crested the Sangre de Cristo foothills when the first convoy rolled through the main gate of Fort Redstone.
Who's running Grandpa's deer gun?
New Mexico. The installation sat 40 miles north of Albuquerque, pressed against a stretch of high desert canyon land.
National Guard. Somebody's idea of a joke.
That the Army had used for long-range marksmanship evaluation since the early 1970s.
Not with this wind.
Southwest at 24, gusting 31. Thermal inversion off the canyon floor day at 1400.
The terrain was brutal by design. Canyon floors dropped 800 feet below the rim, and the wind funneled through the gaps in patterns that no weather model could fully predict. Crosswinds that read 12 miles per hour at the firing line could easily double or triple by the time a bullet reached the far wall. That specific combination of elevation, wind shear,
plate, 3,460 meters, wind southwest at 24, gusting 31, 1 round.
and deceptive distance made Fort Redstone one of the most difficult long-range proving grounds in the entire Department of Defense. Shooters who performed well on flat desert ranges regularly came here and missed targets they swore they could hit blindfolded. The canyon did not care about reputation. The exercise that morning was called Operation Stone Mirror, Joint Evaluation. Army Rangers from 3rd Battalion out of Fort Benning, a recon Marine fire team on temporary assignment from Camp Pendleton, and 2 senior instructor cadre affiliated with the Army Special Forces qualification course at Fort Bragg. The objective was straightforward on paper. Locate and engage a reinforced steel target plate concealed among rock formations on the far canyon wall. 1 shot per shooter. Cold bore. No fouling rounds, no warm-up strings, no second chances. Commander David Hayes, a career officer with 22 years in uniform and a silver star he never talked about, ran the exercise from a command post near the eastern rim. He was a patient man, methodical, the kind of leader who listened more than he spoke and remembered everything. He had reviewed the participant roster the night before, made his notes, and set his expectations accordingly. The canyon had a smell at dawn that was different from any other hour. Cold stone releasing the memory of yesterday's heat, mixed with sage dust and the mineral bite of exposed iron oxide in the rock. Men who had served at Fort Redstone for years said you could tell the wind speed by the smell alone. If the sage was strong, the air was still. If the iron dominated, the wind was already cutting through the gaps, pulling the lighter scents away and replacing them with something older, something that came up from the canyon floor where the sun had not reached in centuries. One name on the roster had given Hayes pause. Kaya Redhawk, 24 years old, listed as National Guard. attached from a regional support element. Her file was thin, almost conspicuously thin. No marksmanship awards. No advanced school credentials. Her unit designation read like administrative filler. And yet someone at Joint Operations Command had specifically requested her inclusion. Hayes had made a phone call. The officer on the other end said only 3 words before hanging up. Just watch her. The firing line was set along the canyon's western rim.
Angle gives that geometry. How in God's name did a 30-06? No! How did she know?
A flat stretch of packed earth reinforced with sandbag positions and spotting stations every 20 meters. The morning light was sharp and gold, throwing long shadows across the rock. 14 shooters stood in a loose formation.
That was not your assigned position.
You relocated without authorization during a live fire exercise.
Hayes delivered the brief. Target is a 12 by 12 inch steel plate, positioned among natural rock cover on the eastern wall. Distance is 3,460 meters. Wind is currently southwest at 24 miles per hour, gusting to 31. Mirage is heavy below the rim. You will fire from designated positions. 1 round, cold bore. He paused. Questions? No questions. These men had done this before. The rifles were staged on the line. Customized Remington 700 series in .338 Lapua Magnum for the Rangers.
She didn't run.
The Marines had brought their own M40A5 systems, heavy-barreled precision platforms built for exactly this kind of work. Bipods, rear bags, Kestrel wind meters, laser rangefinders, ballistic computers on wrist mounts, tens of thousands of dollars in equipment spread across the sandbags like a catalog page from a defense contractor's dream. At the far end of the line, separated from the others by a gap that might have been accidental but felt deliberate, sat a single Winchester Model 70, bolt action. Chambered in .30, .6 Springfield. Blued steel, walnut stock, no tactical chassis, no cheek riser, no rail system. The only modern addition was a low-poled scope mounted with steel rings. The rifle looked like it had been pulled from a ranch wall.
Did you not tell anyone who you were when you arrived?
Credentials don't hit targets, sir. The rifle
In
doesn't know my
1968.
Never shoots from the
Sergeant First Class Cole Braddock, Ranger Team Lead, spotted the Winchester from 40 meters away and let out a low laugh. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been outshot in a room he was standing in. "Who's running Grandpa's deer gun?" he said, loud enough for the line to hear. A Marine raider named Torres leaned against a supply crate and grinned. "That's the tracker girl. National Guard. Somebody's idea of a joke." Kaya was already at her position. She did not look up. She did not respond. She was studying the far canyon wall through the Leupold, her right hand resting on the bolt, with the kind of stillness that had nothing to do with inexperience. Braddock walked closer. "You know that 30-06 drops like a stone past 1500, right? That target's over 2 miles out. You'd need divine intervention and a tailwind from God." She adjusted the scope 1/4 click. Still did not look at him. "Wind's not coming from God today," she said quietly. "It's coming from the southwest at 24. Gusting 31, with a thermal updraft off the canyon floor that inverts around 1400 hours. Braddock blinked. Nobody had mentioned the thermal inversion. It was not in the brief. She had read it off the terrain. He walked away without another word, but the look on his face stayed. The canyon below Fort Redstone ran roughly north to south for 11 miles. carved over millennia by water that no longer existed. The walls were layered sandstone, red and ochre and bone white, cut into shelves and chimneys and overhangs that created a wind environment unlike any flat-ground range in the country. Sound behaved strangely here. A voice spoken at normal volume on the western rim could arrive at the eastern wall as a whisper or as a shout, depending on which shelf caught it. Bullets behaved even stranger. At distances beyond 2,000 meters, a projectile is no longer simply flying. It is falling. It is spinning. It is being pushed sideways by wind, pulled downward by gravity at an accelerating rate, and affected by the rotation of the Earth itself. That phenomenon, the Coriolis effect, is negligible at short range, but becomes a measurable variable beyond 1,500 meters. At 3,460 meters, a shooter must account for the fact that the Earth has physically moved beneath the bullet during its flight time. The correction is small, usually less than a few inches, but at that distance, a few inches is the difference between a hit and a miss by a full body width. Kaya knew this. She also knew something the ballistic computers on the ranger's wrists did not account for. Canyon wind does not move in straight lines. It curls. It eddies around rock formations, accelerates through narrows, and stalls against vertical walls before dropping into turbulent pockets that are invisible to any sensor positioned on the rim. In the first hour of the exercise, 4 Rangers and 2 Marines fired their rounds. Staff Sergeant Dominic Pruitt, Ranger, went first. His .338 Lapua cleared the line with a deep, authoritative bark. The spotting scope showed impact 11 inches left and 14 inches low. A miss on the plate, though a respectable one at that distance. Braddock went second. His shot was better. 7 inches right, 3 inches high. Close enough to hear the ring of a near miss off the rock beside the target, but still off the steel. He stood up slowly, jaw tight, and said nothing. Torres fired third. Impact was lost entirely. The spotter could not locate it. Somewhere in the canyon wall, a .38 caliber bullet had buried itself in sandstone, unmarked and unmeasured. Torres cursed under his breath and pulled his rifle off the sandbag. 3 more shooters followed. One impacted low by 2 feet. 2 others struck rock formations within a meter of the plate. Respectable shooting by any standard. But Operation Stone Mirror did not grade on a curve. Nobody had hit the steel. The pressure cooker effect of competitive shooting among elite operators is a psychological force multiplier that most civilians never see. Each miss raised the stakes for the next man in line. Every pair of eyes behind binoculars carried a silent judgment, and every shooter who walked back from the line did so, knowing that every other man was recalculating whether this target was hittable at all. Hayes watched from the command post, arms folded, expression unreadable. His clipboard showed 8 more shooters in the rotation. Kaya Redhawk was number 11. But when the range safety officer called the next firing order, position 11 was empty. The sandbag was still there. The Winchester was gone, and Kaya Redhawk had vanished. Silence pressed against the canyon walls like something solid. Torres was the first to say it. She bailed. He dropped his binoculars against his chest and shook his head. Saw those misses and figured why bother. Braddock did not respond immediately. He was scanning the eastern ridge through his Kestrel spotting scope, sweeping left to right in slow arcs, as if he expected to find something. He did not know what. Wouldn't blame her. said a younger ranger named Cortland. That Winchester couldn't reach the plate on its best day. Ballistically impossible. The statement was not entirely wrong. A 30-06 Springfield, with a standard 180 grain soft point at roughly 2,700 feet per second muzzle velocity, was never designed for engagements beyond 1,000 meters. At that range, the bullet has lost nearly 60% of its initial velocity. At 2,000 meters, it is subsonic, drifting, subject to every gust and thermal pocket between the barrel and the target. At 3,460 meters, most ballistic tables simply stop calculating. The numbers become theoretical. The probability of impact approaches something that mathematicians describe politely, and shooters describe with profanity. And yet, Kaya had not run. She had moved. What no one on the Western Rim understood was that she had spent the first 90 minutes of the exercise doing something none of them had considered. She was not watching the target. She was reading the canyon. The way dust lifted from the shelf at 900 meters told her where the first wind layer inverted. The way a hawk circled over the South Narrows told her the thermal column was stronger there, pulling air upward, which meant the crosswind at bullet altitude was weaker than surface readings suggested. The pattern of shadow movement on the eastern wall told her the angle of sun exposure was shifting the rock temperature, which would change the thermal draft by early afternoon. She had learned to read terrain from her grandmother on the White Mountain Apache Reservation in eastern Arizona. Not from a book, not from a classroom, from walking, from kneeling in creek beds and pressing her palm against stone to feel which side held the day's heat, from sitting still long enough that the land stopped hiding its patterns and simply showed her. Her grandmother had a phrase for it in their language, one that did not translate neatly into English, but meant something close to "the ground is always talking, but most people walk too loud to hear." The Apache people had been reading this kind of terrain for longer than any army had existed on this continent. Tracking was not a skill they learned. It was a language they were raised in. Every bent blade of grass, every shift in animal behavior, every change in the color of shadow on stone carried information that was as clear to a trained eye as a printed page. The principle was identical to what the Army teaches in its advanced sniper course, just stripped of instruments. Instead of a Kestrel 5000 weather meter, she had her hand held 6 inches above the rock surface. Instead of a laser rangefinder, she had a lifetime of estimating distance across canyons where there were no reference objects for scale. Instead of a ballistic computer, she had a mind that calculated holdover the way other people calculated the tip on a restaurant check, instinctively, constantly, without conscious effort. She moved east, quietly, through a drainage cut that ran below the rim, invisible from the firing line, and emerged 700 meters south of the designated positions, on a rocky shelf that jutted out over the canyon like a broken tooth. From this position, the geometry was different. The crosswind that hammered the western firing line at 24 miles per hour was partially blocked by a massive rock pillar to her north. The effective wind at her new position was closer to 9 miles per hour, and it was consistent, not gusting. The distance to the target from this angle was actually slightly longer, nearly 3,500 meters, but the wind correction was cut by more than half. She settled into the prone position. Bipod legs on the Winchester extended to their maximum. Left hand cupped under the toe of the stock. Cheek welded to walnut. Right eye behind the Leupold. In that moment, her world compressed to a circle of glass and light. Where the hell did she go? Braddock's voice carried across the firing line with an edge that had nothing to do with concern. The rotation had continued. Shooters 9 and 10 had fired. Both missed. 12 out of 12 attempts, and the steel plate sat untouched on the far wall, catching sunlight like a taunt. Hayes lowered his binoculars. Anyone have eyes on Red Hawk? Negative, negative, negative down the line. Torres laughed. Called it. She's probably halfway to the parking lot. Cortland lowered his binoculars and leaned toward Braddock. Sarge, real talk. Did she quit, or does she have a plan? If you are watching this right now, drop your prediction in the comments before the next chapter. Did she run, or did she find something nobody else saw? Let us see who called it. Braddock did not answer. He was still scanning the ridgeline, jaw tight, searching for something he could not name. Then the canyon spoke. The sound came from the wrong direction, not from the western rim where every other shot had originated, but from somewhere south and below, a place no one was looking. The report was different too, lighter than the booming 338 Lapua rounds they had been hearing all morning. Sharper, a crack that sounded almost fragile against the stone walls, like a branch snapping in a cathedral. 4.2 seconds of flight time. That was how long the 180-grain bullet traveled through the canyon air. 4.2 seconds during which the Earth rotated approximately 1.4 inches beneath its path. During which the wind pushed it sideways by a distance she had already accounted for. During which gravity pulled it downward in an arc so steep that the bullet arrived at the target plate nearly 40 degrees below the horizontal. The spotter's voice broke first. Impact. Center. Center of plate. Nobody spoke. Think about that for a moment. 3,460 meters. One shot. Cold barrel. No computer. No spotter calling wind. Could you have even held your nerve long enough to pull the trigger? If the answer is yes, smash that like button right now, because what comes next is even harder to believe. Hayes moved to the primary spotting scope and pressed his eye to the lens. The image was clear in the late morning light. A single hole punched through the steel, dead center, with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident and does not happen by luck. Confirm impact, Hayes said, his voice carrying the controlled calm of a man who had learned decades ago that the moments requiring the most composure were the ones that made the least sense. Confirmed. Single round, center mass. The firing line erupted, not in cheers, but in questions. Where had she fired from? How had she known? What position gave her that angle? And how, in the name of everything they had trained for, had a 30-06 Springfield, a cartridge their grandfathers used to hunt elk, just done what their precision-built Lapua systems could not? Braddock was staring through his scope at the eastern ridge when he saw her. A silhouette small against the sky, standing on a shelf of rock that none of them had identified as a viable firing position. She was already on her feet, the Winchester resting in the crook of her arm, barrel pointed at the ground. She walked back to the firing line the same way she had left, without announcement, without hurry. The dust on her elbows and knees told the story of a low crawl through the drainage cut. The calm in her face told a different story entirely. Hayes met her at the edge of the sandbag line. Red Hawk, that was not your assigned position. No, sir. You relocated without authorization during a live fire exercise? Yes, sir. He studied her for a long moment. The kind of silence a commander uses when he already knows the answer, but wants to see how the person standing in front of him carries the weight of it. Why? The assigned position was wrong, sir. Wind corridor funnels through that section of the rim at variable speeds with no consistent pattern. The thermal off the canyon floor creates a false read on the kestrel at that elevation. Every shooter on that line was correcting for wind that changed direction between the time they read it and the time they pulled the trigger. The operators behind her had gone quiet, not the dismissive quiet of before. Something else. And your position? 700 meters south, on the shelf above the drainage cut. Rock pillar to the north blocks the primary crosswind channel. Effective wind at that elevation is 9 miles per hour. Consistent. Thermal column from the canyon floor passes east of the shelf, not through it. Cleaner air. Predictable trajectory. Hayes did not blink. You calculated all of that without instruments. I use different instruments, sir. He held out his hand. Identification. She pulled the card from her chest pocket. Standard military ID. But the unit designation was not National Guard. It read Special Reconnaissance Liaison, Joint Operation Support. The clearance level printed in the corner was one that most of the men on that firing line had never seen on a physical card. A Joint Operations Support Liaison is not a regular soldier. The designation exists for individuals whose operational role crosses branch boundaries, individuals who work with special forces, intelligence units, and interagency task forces without belonging formally to any single command. The clearance that comes with that role requires a background investigation that takes longer than most enlisted contracts. Braddock saw the card from 6 feet away. His expression shifted through 3 distinct phases in under 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and something that looked very much like the ground falling out from under him. Hayes handed the card back. There's been a story circulating through the special operations community for about 2 years. A tracking operation in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. A team got pinned down in a box canyon during a joint exercise that went wrong. Weather closed in. Comms failed. Extraction helicopters could not fly. The team was led out on foot through 14 miles of mountain terrain at night, guided by a single operator who navigated without GPS, without maps, using terrain features and star positions. He paused. The after-action report listed the guide only by a call sign, Canyon Ghost. Kaya said nothing. She pulled back the sleeve on her left forearm. A small tattoo, simple black ink, showed a set of geographic coordinates. No name, no unit crest, no decoration, just numbers marking the location where that team walked out alive. Torres, who had laughed twice that morning, was no longer laughing. He was staring at the coordinates on her arm, as if they were written in a language he was only now learning to read.
I'm just not sure what to make of it.
Braddock took a single step forward. He did not apologize with words. He extended his hand. She took it. One firm shake. His grip said everything his voice could not. Commander Hayes stood at the edge of the canyon rim as the afternoon light turned the rock walls from gold to copper. The wind had shifted as Kaya had predicted it would, and now blew gently from the east, carrying the smell of warm stone and sage. He made 2 notations on his clipboard. The first was a formal recommendation that the firing position Kaya had identified, the shelf above the drainage cut, be incorporated into the permanent training protocol for Operation Stone Mirror. The geometry she had found would be studied, measured, and taught to every long-range class that came through Fort Redstone from that day forward. The second notation was shorter. A single line added to the exercise evaluation, classified that read only, "Subject Red Hawk confirmed operational. Recommend expanded integration." Women had been serving in forward combat positions in the United States military since the formal policy change in 2015. But the path from policy to practice had been neither straight nor smooth. Every base had its skeptics. Every unit had its gatekeepers. And every woman who walked onto a firing line, carrying something other than what the men expected, still carried an invisible weight that no regulation could legislate away. What Kaya had done that morning did not change a system, but it changed the silence in one canyon, on one day, among 14 men who would never again assume that the quietest person on the line had nothing to say. The transport vehicles were loading. Gear bags thumped into truck beds. Rifle cases clicked shut. The canyon was emptying the way canyons always do at the end of an exercise. Slowly, reluctantly, as if the rock itself wanted to hold on to the echo a little longer. Kaya secured the Winchester in its case. The walnut stock disappeared behind faded canvas, and she buckled the strap with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything else.
Next time,
Hayes approached her one final time. Red Hawk, for the record, why did you not tell anyone who you were when you arrived? She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. The canyon wind moved a loose strand of hair across her forehead, and she did not brush it away. Because credentials do not hit targets, sir. The rifle does not know my name. The wind does not read my clearance level. She paused, and for the first time that day, something close to a smile crossed her face. My people have always known that the terrain decides the battle. Whoever listens to the mountain never shoots from the wrong place. Hayes nodded once. He did not need to say anything else. She walked toward the convoy, the rifle case slung over one shoulder, and the dust of the canyon still on her boots. Behind her, the rock walls held the last light of the afternoon in silence, the way they had held every sound and every secret that had ever passed through them. Somewhere on the eastern wall, a 12 by 12-inch steel plate sat with a single hole punched clean through its center. The wind moved over it without resistance. And if you are still here, if this story found you the way the wind found that canyon, then you already know there are more voices like hers waiting to be heard. Hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell, because the next story coming to this channel is one that even the Pentagon tried to keep quiet. You do not want to miss it.